Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we've got another season preview video. We've done the first two, talking about the Habs and the Bruins, and the Hawks and the Blues. Today we're talking about the Blue Jackets and the New Jersey Devils. These two teams were extremely close to each other, finishing center and fourth in the Metro Division. We'll look at how they did last year, how they did this offseason, and we'll look ahead to this upcoming season, the 25-26 season for both these teams. We'll to all the updates from our past couple of days coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we get started, don't forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. And do not forget to stay tuned for more videos coming out in the very near future. Now in today's video, another season preview video. As we've done in the past couple of videos, we're going to first look at the team's previous stats from this past season. We'll look at their off-season additions, their subtractions, their trades, the top 3 draft picks from this past season. We'll look at my checklist of 5 things that I thought these two teams should do in the offseason preview videos for this team, how they accomplished those things. We'll look at my projected lineup for the team, my predictions for the 25-26 season, and we'll look at the grading for this offseason. So we'll start with the Columbus Blue Jackets. This team was ever so close to making the playoffs in the Eastern Conference. The Eastern Conference, especially that wild card race, was extremely bad. The Jackets almost at the end of the season snuck into a wild card spot. However, they did finish 2 points behind both the Devils and the Canadiens for the last 2 spots in the Eastern Conference. So they finished with 89 points, a 40-33-9 record. I think they by far blew most people's expectations of how good they were going to do last year. They finished 4th in the Metro, 9th in the East, and 20th in the NHL. So once again, not a bad season there from the Jackets, and ever so slightly missed out on a playoff spot. They wound up scoring and giving up 267 goals, so they had an even ranking. So the Montreal Canadiens made the playoffs with a -18 ranking. They missed the playoffs with an even ranking, so not really fair for the Blue Jackets. But they were a really good goal scoring team, not the greatest defensively, so very interesting note there. Zach Werenski, who had a Norris level season, wound up finishing the team's point leader with 82 points. Kirill Marchenko was second with 74, and Sean Monahan and Kent Johnson were tied for third with 57. Well, Kirill Marchenko led the team in goals with 31. Fantilli also had 31 for the Blue Jackets, and Kent Johnson had 24. And once again, like we just talked about, they barely ever so slightly missed out in the playoffs, but still, Marchenko, Werenski both had fantastic seasons. And there were a couple other younger guys who also had pretty good seasons there from the Jackets too, but alas, it was all for naught as they did miss the playoffs. Next, going over to their additions and subtractions from this past offseason. So for their additions, they had Isaac Lundestrom from Anaheim in free agency, Charlie Coyle and Miles Wood in a trade from Colorado, Brendan Gaunson in a trade from Minnesota, Dyson Mayo in free agency from Vegas, and a 2025 5th round pick from Florida. They move off of James Van Riemsdyk to Detroit, Kevin LeBanc, who's a UFA, Corrali goes to Boston, Kunin's a UFA, Brinley as part of that Coyle deal to Colorado, Danforth to Buffalo, Butler in a trade to Minnesota, Harris to Boston, Jack Johnson on a PTO to Minnesota, Daniel Tarasov to Florida in a trade, and they moved their 2025 3rd and 2027 2nd round pick to the Colorado Avalanche as part of the Coyle deal. So very interesting note there, like if you look at this team, they did lose quite a bit of depth. Like you lose JVR, LeBanc, Corrali, Kunin, as well as Danforth, and a solid young prospect in Brinley up front. However, the additions do amount to replacing those subtractions, as they got Lundestrom is going to be a solid top 9 forward, Coyle is going to be a solid top 9 forward, and Wood's going to be a solid speedy penalty kill guy, and Gons can even play a couple of times during the season. On defense, they did lose Harris, they did lose Johnson, they only got Mayo, so they did get a tiny bit worse on the defensive end, but they did keep Provorov, they did keep Fabro, so those were solid positives there for the Jackets. Goaltending wise was the biggest problem last year. The only change was they moved Daniel Tarasov, so like I do have some concerns goaltending wise. But besides that, it wasn't the best offseason by any means, but it was a decent one from the Blue Jackets. They made 3 trades this past offseason involving players. They wound up acquiring Charlie Coyle and Miles Wood from the Colorado Avalanche in exchange for Gavin Brindley, a 2025 3rd round pick, and their 2027 2nd round pick. They moved Daniel Tarasov to Florida for a 2025 5th round pick, and they also swapped AHL players, acquiring Brendan Gaunce from Minnesota in exchange for Cameron Butler. So very interesting note there. So those are some very interesting trades that this team made during the season. Their top 3 draft picks from this past year, their top 2 were 1st round picks. 14th overall in the first round, they took left shot defenseman Jackson Smith. Really solid left shot defenseman, a guy who we thought was going to go higher, so he falls into their laps at number 14. And they took one of the top goaltending prospects, 20th overall in the first round, and that was Petr Andrianov, who's probably going to need a couple of years in the KHL to develop, but long term might be this team's goalie of the future, which would be really good there for the Jackets. And then in the third round, 76th overall, their third pick of the draft, and they took left shot defenseman Voss, who I think eventually might be able to be like a solid second or third pair defenseman. So very interesting note there, but the Jackets definitely need some help on the back end, and adding Smith, Voss, and Andrianov with their first 3 picks were really good stuff there from the Jackets. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to my off-season checklist. In the off-season preview video I did for the Jackets, I gave 5 things I thought this team should do in the off-season to improve this upcoming season. The first one was move or buy out Merzlikins and add a starter. The second one was keep Provorov or add another top 4 defenseman. The third one was let younger players like Hunt, Matejchuk, Faitia, and Delbel Blues all have opportunities to play. The fourth one was consider moving one of their first round picks that they have 2 of this past offseason. And the fifth one was add some defensive depth. So for the Jackets, the first thing they did not complete, Merzlikins is still on this team. He was never bought out. And on top of that, they did not add a starter. So with all that in mind, the top priority in my opinion was to try and change up their goaltending. They didn't do it this offseason, so that's a big X on their checklist. The second thing I said this team should do was to either keep Provorov or add a top 4 defenseman, and they did that. They kept Provorov. It was a pretty hefty contract, definitely considering what he could have gone on free agency, but still, there was a keep around Provorov, and he should be a long-time fit there for the Jackets in their top 4, which is still a pretty good thing there for the Jackets. The third thing I said was open up some roster spots so guys like Hunt, Matejchuk, Faitia, and Delbel Blues could all play at the NHL level. I think they've done that to some extent. Like, they didn't really add a whole bunch of players, especially guys on the forward side will have opportunities to challenge for top 9 roles. So very interesting note there, but I definitely do think that the Jackets really improved and will have some opportunities for some of the younger players to play. The fourth thing I said this team should do was to consider moving either the 14th or 20th overall pick. I thought it would have been better suited to move and try and acquire some sort of other talent. They didn't do that. They used both their first round selections. So once again, I don't think it's overly bad for the Blue Jackets. I just would have liked to see them go in a different direction. And the fifth thing I said this team should do was to add some defensive depth. They didn't do that. Like, they didn't really add anyone besides the guy at Dyson Mayo. So I'm a little concerned about not adding some defensive depth. So I said those 5 things were my off-season checklist. They did keep Provorov, which was one of my things that I said this team was to do. The third thing that I said this team needed to do was to keep some options open when it comes to their roster spots for some younger players. They did that to some extent, but they didn't move or buy out Merzlikins, didn't add defensive depth, and didn't move one of their first round picks, which is some things I thought in that off-season preview this team needed to do. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to my current projected lineup for the Columbus Blue Jackets for this upcoming season. So if you look at my lineup for the Blue Jackets for the 25-26 season, at this point in time, I have Ken Johnson playing on line 1 with Sean Monahan and Kirill Marchenko, Dmitry Voronkov playing on line 2 with Adam Fantilli and Igor Chinnikov, Isaac Lundestrom on line 3 with Thillinger and Coyle, and line 4 would be Wood, Jenner, and Olivier. The first pair would be Werenski with Severson, Provorov Fabros pair 2, and Gabranson Matejchuk's pair 3. Merzlikins will be a starter, Greaves would be the backup, and then Aston Reese, Gauntz, and Christensen will be the spares. And that would actually be a pretty decent roster there for the Columbus Blue Jackets. So very interesting note there, but that's my current lineup projections for the Blue Jackets for this upcoming season. Next, going over to my predictions for the Blue Jackets for the 2025-2026 season. Now, I feel like the Jackets team just scratched their potential last year. Like, I thought 89 points, they could do better than that. I think they definitely improved their forward group. They have a little more veteran presence. This team also has a really solid young core. So I think all the stuff is going to click. I think the biggest thing the season's going to hinge on is whether Merzlikins bounces back or not and how Greaves does the backup. But if their goaltending's at least average, if not a little bit above average, I think this Jackets team is going to be a scary one to face this upcoming season. I have the Jackets finishing second in a weak Metro Division. I have them finishing with a record of 47, 26, and 9 for 103 points, which will be second in the Metro Division. So I only have them finishing behind one team. I think they're going to be poised if their goaltending is good enough to make a top 3 spot this upcoming season. So that's where I have the Jackets going at this point. I have confidence in them. They're going to take a big step this upcoming season and finish 14 points higher than they were last year. So that's my predictions for the Blue Jackets for this upcoming season. And lastly, going over to their offseason grade. So I do think they got a little bit better talent-wise, adding Lundestrom, adding Coyle, Gons to some extent, into the forward group to replace guys like Van Reimsdyk, LeBanc, Kunin. I like those moves. I do think that the defensive depth is a little bit concerning. I do think not adding a goaltender is a little bit concerning, so I can't really say they had a great offseason. I think they had a slightly above average offseason, so at this current point in time, I'm going to give them a B- rate. I think that's sort of warranted with how decent of an offseason they had. Like, it wasn't a great offseason by any means, but I would say it's a little bit above average. So that's my current opinion on the Columbus Blue Jackets. Lastly here, going over to the New Jersey Devils. So going over to the New Jersey Devils, last year was a pretty solid season for the Devils, like we just talked about. Ever so slightly snuck into the last spot in the Metro Division to make the playoffs. Finished with a record of 42, 33, and 7 for 91 points. Finished 3rd in the Metro Division, 7th in the East, and 16th in the NHL. So once again, it wasn't a bad season there for the New Jersey Devils, but it was one where they ever so slightly, like, they lose one more game in regulation last year. They're probably on the outside looking on the playoff mark, so they ever so slightly snuck in. Last year, they finished the season with 240 goals for, 220 goals against. So they were a plus 20, so goals for, goals against wise, they were actually a pretty dominant team last year. The point leaders and goal scoring leaders for this team, Bratt led the team with 88 points. Jack Hughes, even though he missed a big chunk of the season, was second with 70 points. And Nico Hischier was third on their team with 69 points. Well, goal scoring wise, Nico Hischier, great season goal scoring, put up 35 goals. Jack Hughes, once again, missed a whole bunch of time, was still second on the team in goal scoring with 27. And Timo Meier was third on the team with 26. So once again, solid season from Bratt point wise, solid season from Hischier goal scoring wise. And even though he missed a whole bunch of time due to injuries, Hughes had a fantastic season. So very interesting note there. The Devils were able to make the playoffs at the 3rd team in the Metro Division, faced the Canes, who were 2nd team in the Metro Division. Right from the get-go because of injuries as well as talent-wise. The Devils were outclassed. Got out to a 2-0 hole, were able to win game 3, but then lost the next 2 and lost the series in 5 games. So it was a very short playoff stint for the New Jersey Devils, but they were at least able to get back to it, so that's very good there. Hischier led the team with 4 goals, while Meier and Mercer both had 2 goals, and then Meier and Hischier both were tied for the team lead in the playoffs with 4 points. So once again, not great point totals there from the New Jersey Devils, but still wasn't overly bad, and they at least made the playoffs, so that was a positive there from the New Jersey Devils. Next, going over to their additions and subtractions from this past season. So for their additions, they had Connor Brown from Edmonton, again Adonov from Dallas, Thomas Bordeleau in a trade from San Jose, Angus Crookshanks from Ottawa, Kalen Addison, who played in the AHL last year, and then Jeremy Hansel from Nashville, and the Predators 2025 4th round pick in this past year's draft. Well, they subtracted Eric Haula, who was traded to Nashville, Tomas Tatar, who's a UFA, Lazar, who left to Edmonton, Sprong, who signed overseas, Bastian, who signed in Dallas, Foote, who signed in Florida, Bowers, who was traded to San Jose, and Dumoulin, who signed in Los Angeles. So if you look at this team, like if you look at their additions, subtractions, they add Brown, they add Donov, they add Bordeleau, all 3 guys I think are challenged for roster spots this upcoming season. Would not be one bit surprised if Brown was definitely a top 9 forward, and Donov and Bordeleau could be bottom 6 forwards. They did lose Haula, they did lose Tatar, Lazar, Sprong, Bastian. Like, that's a pretty decent amount of solid bottom 6 forwards, so they might be a little bit weaker in their depth, but still I think adding guys like Brown to Donov, experienced guys who know what it takes to, and I think that'll be solid pickups there for the New Jersey Devils. Defensive wise, goaltending wise, really not much changes from last year. Brian Dumoulin was a trade deadline add, like losing him's not overly bad, especially for the contract he signed in Los Angeles. Kalen Addison could be a solid like 6-7 guy on the team's defense, especially with Jonathan Kovacevic most likely missing the start of the season due to injuries. You also got Jeremy Hansel, who I think eventually might be able to turn himself into like a call-up option. So like I said, defensive wise, goaltending wise, not very much changes. They were able to keep Jake Allen, which was a big plus for the New Jersey Devils, as their backup. So very interesting note there, but some really interesting stuff from the Devils and their additions and subtractions. This team made 2 trades this past season. They traded Eric Haula to Nashville for Jeremy Hansel in 2025 4th round pick, and then they did a prospect swap, trading Shane Bowers to the San Jose Sharks in in exchange for Thomas Bordeleau. I do think they won the Bordeleau deal, and I do think moving off of Haula's contract to go after a guy like Connor Brown wasn't an overly bad deal there for the Devils either. So they made some very interesting trades. Next, going over to the team's draft picks. Their first 3 draft picks from the 2025 draft. So if you look at this team, they did not have a first round pick traded to Calgary as part of the Jacob Markstrom deal. So they had no first round picks. Their first pick in the 2025 draft was in the second round. 50th overall, they took center prospect Fronderk. They also had another second round pick, 63rd overall, and they took Kevon. And then in the third round, 90th overall, they took Mo, who was a third round pick. So very interesting note there. All forward prospects, Fronderk, Mo centers, Kevin as the right winger. I think long term, all guys have shots to be maybe solid like middle 6, bomb 6 forwards. So very interesting note there. Like I said, not a whole bunch of high end draft selections this Devils team had this past draft, but they definitely hit home on a couple of solid pieces. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to the offseason checklist. A couple of weeks ago during my offseason preview video, I had 5 things I said the Devils team should do in the offseason to improve for this upcoming season. The one was to add a top 6 forward. The second one was to consider moving one of Palat, Haula, or Hamilton. The third one was to let Nemec and Casey play at the NHL level. The fourth one was to bring back Jake Allen or add a new backup. And the fifth one was to add some veteran bottom 6 help. So the first thing they weren't able to do, like I like Brown, Dadonov's a solid player. Bordeleau, I think, has a bright future. None of them are solid top 6 forwards. I want to see him add one more lethal go-to guy on the forward group, like a Jason Robertson, a Mitch Marner, a Brock Besser, something like that. And they weren't able to do it this offseason. So my top priority for this team was not met. So that's a big X for one of my checklists. The second thing on my checklist was to move at least one of Palat, Haula, or Hamilton. They did move Haula, so that's sort of a thing completed on my checklist. Like they were able to move Haula. There's still some speculation they could still move Hamilton, so I'm going to give them a plus on that one. They did wind up doing something that I said they should do in the offseason preview video. The third thing was to let Nemec or Casey play in the NHL. I think with where their defense did this offseason, I think they're planning on playing at least one of Nemec or Casey, if not potentially both of them, especially with Kovacevic missing the start of the season. So I'm going to give them all right on that one. They didn't really move off anyone on the blue line besides Dumoulin, but they didn't really add anyone either, so I do think Nemec and Casey will have shots to play at the NHL level. The fourth thing I said this team should do was to bring back Allen or add another backup. They brought back Allen. The term was a little bit surprising, but they kept him under $2 million, which was great. So Allen's going to be the backup for this team for the foreseeable future, which is fantastic. And the fifth thing I said this team should do was to add some veteran bottom 6 help. And I think guys like Dadonov and Brown bring that. Both guys can play third, fourth line minutes. Dadonov's more of a fourth liner. Brown can be a penalty killer. Like I do like those additions there from the Devils to add some veteran experience on the fourth line. So very interesting note there. But the New Jersey Devils definitely hit a whole bunch of checks on my checklist for this offseason, as they were able to move Haula. They do have some space for Nemec or Casey to play NHL minutes. Allen was kept on the team, and they add some veteran bottom 6 help. So very interesting note there. Next, going over to my current projected lineup for the New Jersey Devils for 2025-2026 season. So as it sits right now, my current projected lineup is Bratt, Hughes, and Mercer on the first line. The second line is Palat, Hischier, and Meyer. The third line is Brown, Glass, and Nosen. And the fourth line is Bordeleau with Dadonov and Cotter. The first pair is Stiegenthaler with Hamilton. The second pair is Luke Hughes with Brett Pesce. And the third pair is Dylan with Casey. Markstrom and Allen are 2 goalies. And then Crookshanks, McDermott, and Nemec are the 3 spares, with Kovacevic obviously starting the season on injury reserve. And that would be a decent lineup there for the Devils, at least to start the season. Like long term, they may have to make some movement when it comes to potentially moving around some bodies once Kovacevic gets back, but still not a bad lineup there for the New Jersey Devils. Next, going over to the predictions for the New Jersey Devils I have for this upcoming season. Now, I have the Devils having a pretty good season. I have them doing a slight bit better than last year, finishing in around the same spot. I have them finishing with a record of 45-30-7 for 97 points, third in the Metro Division. So once again, I have them finishing third in the Metro. I do have them finishing 6 points higher than where they were last year, so I have them being a tiny bit better. I do have them still making the playoffs, obviously, as being third in the Metro. So I do think the Devils did enough to keep a playoff spot in the Metro Division. I do think teams like the Rangers, the Jackets, and maybe to some extent a team like Pittsburgh, if they don't move a whole bunch of players, could challenge for that third spot in the Metro Division too. But I do think that the Devils have done enough to keep a top 3 spot in the Metro Division. And while I don't think they had a awfully great offseason. I do think they definitely did quite well, so very interesting note there, but I do have the Devils finishing with 97 points at third in the Metro Division. And lastly, here going over to my offseason grade for the team. Now, if you look at this team, look at how they're constructed right now. They made some very interesting moves, adding guys like Brown, Bordeleau, Bordeleau, Addison on the blue line. They lost a lot of depth though, losing guys like Haula, Tatar, Lazar, Sprong, Bastian, but they do have a lot of really good influx of youth coming up as well. So at current point in time, I'm going to give them a B+ rating. I don't think they had a perfect offseason by any means. I think if they were to add one more top 6 forward, they probably would have had an A rating in their offseason grades, but they didn't do that. They only sort of fixed some edge work this offseason, so I'm going to give them a B+ rating. Didn't really do anything that I'm overly upset about, but they didn't really do anything flashy either. So I'm going to give them a B+ rating, and I think they had a pretty solid offseason. So that's my thoughts on the Devils. That's my thoughts on the Jackets. I'll let you guys thoughts. Do you think the Devils and Jackets will be 2 of the top 3 teams in the Metro Division this upcoming season? Do you think the Jackets can take that next step? Do you think the Devils are good enough to be a playoff team? Definitely have your thoughts on all of that, plus all the other things that we talked about. How do you think they did this past offseason? And what do you think about their futures going forward? Definitely thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. That's all I'm going to talk about for today. We're going to like this video. And if you're not subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without all of you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for more videos coming out in the very near future. I also do a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So remember to check that out. I'll link that down in the description below. Cannot wait to see you guys all for our next video. See you guys soon.